This is Costello, Master Sommelier, and the Estates Ambassador of Bien Nacido and Solomon Hills Estate Wines. As the Estates Ambassador, I have the opportunity to tell stories all around the country and sometimes all around the world about what makes this part of Santa Barbara and this vineyard and the wines so special. And one of my favorite parts about this is getting to tell the in-depth, long history of Bien Nacido Vineyard, where it came from, the history of the property, and what makes it so special. So I'm hopeful that today I get to tell you a little bit about this and dive further into what makes Bien Nacido Vineyard itself special. So the land where Bien Nacido is was once part of Alta California. Now, Alta California was a state of the greater Spanish and Mexican empires and started off in the 1500s when the Spanish started to conquest around the world. Of course, many of us know the history that the Philippines were a Spanish territory. Of course, Mexico, right? Now, the funny thing that you don't know, or many don't know, is that if you look at the history of the states of the Spanish and Mexican Empire, is that there are many parts of them named for other territories. For example, there is a New Philippines. New Philippines is actually where the portion of San Antonio and Houston in Texas are. It actually butted up to the border of where Louisiana is before the Louisiana Purchase allowed the rest of the western United States to transfer over to the U.S. There's a portion called New Mexico, which we all recognize if we're from the United States, right? We still have a state called New Mexico. And there are also two portions of what is now sort of Arizona, Nevada, and California that was called Alta California. And the southern portion of it was called Baja California. Of course, Baja California is where Tijuana, Ensenada, Puerto Nuevo, Cabo are in Mexico. But Alta California was a state that made its way all the way up to above San Francisco. Now, each of the states had their own gobernador or governor, and the gobernadors oversaw the state much like we do in the United States. One of California's favorite governors that we had was Arnold Schwarzenegger. People actually used to call him, if you remember the nickname, the Governator, right? Well, it's funny because it's obviously he was the Terminator, but it sounds much like gobernador, governor. He was the governor of that state. Now, there were about 13 different gobernadors or governors of Alta California when it was under the Spanish and the Mexican nation. Now, each of these governors had many of the same obligations as a governor does right now. They oversaw all of the peoples, they collected taxes, but one of the special things that they had was the chance to give land grants to important parts of the populace. Some of those were people who were part of the military, for example, colonels or generals would often get land grants, usually given land over towards the edge of a territory or a state. You had people like aristocrats who, just because of their relationship with the governor, had the chance to buy these for sometimes thousands or sometimes pennies for large swaths of land. And sometimes people who were heroes were given portions of land as well, much as a thank you, like getting a medal around your neck from the governor. Well, there was one governor, his name is Pio Pico, and he'll come to our story a little bit later, maybe tomorrow or the next day when we talk about Solomon Hills. But during the early 1830s, he was actually governor only for 1 year. And this was when the transition was happening between Mexico and Spain. And Pio Pico had the chance to give a large swath of land over to a gentleman named Tomas Oliveira. Typically, you would give a portion of land far, far out in almost on the borders of where you are if you were a general or someone with military practice. In France, they called this a marquis. It was generally a title almost like a lord. In Italy, it was a marchese. In Spain, it was a marquez. Each of these were landowners, given land on the edge of the property, and oftentimes they would give this land over to a general because that general could then protect the land that he owned, but still unowned it in the nation. So if you had someone coming in to attack or maraud and wanting to make their way through the lands, they would have to get through somebody who had military experience first, who might be able to hold them off, be able to call for reinforcements, and be able to make sure that you can secure the borderland. So you see how all around the edges you would have these land ownerships as marquises or marquesas or generals who owned the land. Now, if you were aristocracy or in some other way indebted by the state to you, you would generally get a portion of land that, of course, wasn't right in the hearts of the cities, but often in an area that you oversaw. And this is where Tomás Olivera comes in. Tomás Olivera was the, I guess the best way to call it, is steward of 3 different missions in the Central Coast area. He actually saw all the way up north, Mission San Luis Obispo. He saw in the heart of the Santa Barbara Valley, Mission Santa Ynez, and he oversaw Mission Santa Barbara as well. Each of these missions, he would ride his horse and sometimes cattle up and down the coast, checking on these as he saw fit to make sure that they had everything that they needed, that they were being supported in any way that they were. And because of this long journey back and forth, the governor recommended that he be able to purchase a large swath of land. And in fact, if you think about driving through a car or in a car to each of those spots, from Mission San Luis Obispo to Mission Santa Ynez to finally Mission Santa Barbara, in a car, it would probably take you 2 hours and 25 minutes, maybe 2 hours and 30 minutes, right? And that's going 65. We know some people are going 70. We know some people are going 80. It'll take you about 2 to 2.5 hours, right? In a car. He was riding a horse typically, and sometimes carrying supplies, so even with a buggy behind him. So checking on each of these for years and years and years would have to get pretty crazy, especially when you think about the fact that there are marauders themselves who might be hiding in the arroyos on your way when you're following the El Camino Real, who might want to rob you, right? So it was a dangerous job. And Tomás Olivera had the chance to be given this property for the princely sum of $1, right? The land itself roughly covered about 2,500 hectares, or a little above 5,000 acres, and it was known as Rancho Tepusque. And in fact, Rancho Tepusque, you could see original plots on the map that covered this sort of V shape of land that covered where Bien Nacido is currently, as well as the towns of Sisquoc and Gary, and a little bit of the Cuyama and Santa Maria Valley River itself. Well, he owned this land for upwards of 25 years before he had his daughter, and his daughter met a man named Juan Pacifico Ontiveros, who was a cattleman who lived down in the LA Basin. So she and him fell in love. Dad, Tomás Olivera, who had this land grant, decided to give a large portion of it to his daughter and her new beau so that they would have somewhere to live. And this was Rancho Tepusque, the land where Bien Nacido is currently now. So they actually owned the land for upwards of 100 years. They built the Adobe that is on the front of our labels, if you're familiar with the Bien Nacido labels. And they actually built this Adobe in the perfect spot. To me, they put it exactly where you would want to if you wanted to be protected and see everything around. So where the Adobe is, it's right in the middle of the valley. If you look towards the north, together where the amphitheater is, you can see every bit of the Cuyama River. You can see anything that would be coming in from the north. If you look towards the south where the valley opens up, you can see the Santa Maria River. And the most important part is there's a large white hill that covers the hillside and allows for this sort of wind ramp so that anything below where the house was actually built would allow for the wind to kind of come off the windward and sail over the house. Santa Maria is very, very windy. Typically, we get wind between 15 and 20 miles per hour almost every day. It just happens because of the nature of the east and west mountain ranges. Anyway, going back to that idea of this house, the house was finished in 1857. It still stands on the property. That's why we pay homage to it on our labels. It looks exactly the same way it did, except for a new roof and a couple coats of paint. Added some windows in there as well, because typically they didn't have any glass. So they would just use the shutters to open and close. Well, after the Ontiveros family had owned the property for upwards of 100 years, they sold portions of it off to a guy named G. Allen Hancock. Now, G. Allen Hancock was a multi-millionaire. He actually made his money in oil down in the La Brea region of Los Angeles. He was an aristocrat himself. He actually funded the first trans-Pacific flight attempt. Can't remember who was the captain. Can't remember. Anyway, he funded that, and he also had agriculture pursuits. Well, when G. Allen Hancock died in the late 1960s, the two portions of land that he had broken off and sold off to two different families were reunited by the Miller family. This is where Bob and Steve Miller come in. So Bob and Steve Miller were part of the fourth generation of the Broom family, who owned what is now known as Rancho Guadalasca or Guadalasco down near Point Mugu in Ventura. Now, this was a huge portion of land. In fact, William Broom bought this 20,000 plus acre property in land grant in 1871. So the Millers are fifth generation family. They decided to move and start a different agricultural pursuit up in Santa Maria Valley. So they bought these two parcels of land, reunited them, and instead of calling it the original property of Rancho Tepusque, which was a native word, the terminology for it wasn't exactly known and isn't known. There's one of the largest mountains in the region called Mount Tepusque. And instead of just naming it Rancho Tepusque, which the Oliveira and Ontiveros family had named it, they decided to rechristen it Rancho Tepusque and Bien Nacido Vineyard. So Bien Nacido, B-I-E-N-N-A-C-I-D-O, means well born. And Bien Nacido is essentially the new rebirth of this historic property from the mid-1800s, rechristened by the Miller family in the 1960s. Really amazing history, and you can kind of tell when you come to the property. And we do tours of the property typically Monday through Friday with our winemaker, Anthony Avila. He'll do tours starting at the Adobe, so you can see the history of that. And when you get out there, you can just feel there's this amazing history, right? You can see the Cuyama River, which right now has a ton of water in it because we've gotten about 14 inches of rain thus far this year, which is a good start. You can see where the Santa Maria Basin is. You can almost see from the top of the property out to the ocean. And we give you this opportunity on every single tour to share that experience. If you have any questions, one of the best things you can do is send us a note either below this video on your comment, or you can use the hashtag BienTheKnow, B-I-E-N, like Bien Nacido, B-I-E-N-T-H-E-K-N-O-W, on any of your posts about the wines, and either myself or a winemaker would be happy to get back to you. It's an amazing opportunity for me to share the history of Bien Nacido, and I'm going to continue this series talking about not only where Santa Maria Valley is, what makes the soils of Bien Nacido so special, what an AVA is, but if you watch these in whole, you'll get an understanding of what makes not only our vineyard special, but also the region as a whole, and why Santa Barbara really is one of the most special parcels of land for growing grapes in all of California. Thanks everyone for joining me today, and look forward to connecting with you soon.